Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Hope Labs, where we're connecting thought, word, and deed. And I am here today with one of what I call the kings of the DC area, Mr. Tony Lewis Jr. Tony, what's up, man?
Rare, how you?
Good to see you, man.
Always, man.
Man, we appreciate you coming by, man. Now,
Thanks for having me.
Tony, it's a range of things you do,
Yeah,
but really, I wanted to talk to you about all your work that you do in the reentry community for those
sure.
who are returning citizens, etc. And your work isn't just some people's work is theoretical.
Yeah,
Some people's work is just because they figured out it's something they want to do. But your work comes from a very personal kind of a space. So talk a little bit about your story first, and then we can
sure.
talk.
Yeah. So I'm from DC, as you stated, and my father went to prison when I was 9 years old for his role in a drug conspiracy here in the district. But I come from a community, a street, Hanover place where the underworld was sort of the driving culture in my community, and so many of the people in my life, family, friends, were engaged in that, and so obviously incarceration comes along with that.
Right.
So all my life, from my uncles and other men in my community, even before my dad went to prison, prison has been a part of my life, right? And then obviously when my dad goes to jail, it becomes even more personal. There's no more personal experience than one of your parents going to jail. And so moving forward, growing up in that same community, the men and the women sometimes in my community went to jail. And so prison had become very much a part of my reality. And as I would find my purpose, if you will. Initially, I started out working in youth outreach, and then that led me to working with the reentry program in the city. And so I had the opportunity to sort of combine my personal and my professional gifts, or personal professional experiences to help move the needle. And I think I became somebody that was able to reach those that others couldn't reach because people understood how personal it was for
Right.
me. And the other part I think is left out a lot too is just like, yeah, I'm a college graduate. I don't know if I say that enough.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been incarcerated personally myself.
Right.
I think the perspective of someone who has been so aligned with incarceration but not being incarcerated himself gave me a certain buy-in,
Right.
where I could meet you where you are,
Right.
but also can help you get to another point.
Right.
And so many times in this work, I feel like it's only about meeting people where they are, right? But isn't that how far does that go, or how far does that take us if you can't get a person to transform?
Right.
And I think the trust and the belief that people have in me is really rooted in what they've seen. I grew up with many of the people that I serve,
Right.
or grew up under them, right? They know me.
Right.
And I think that's allowed me also to have people be more accountable,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they know how much I care. I was talking to my dad the other day, and he said a guy, he's in federal prison in Cumberland, Maryland right now. A guy walked up to him and was just saying that he was in one of my programs, was in my class.
Wow.
He said, man, I just want to let you know, man, like, your son don't play, man. Right? So he was like, he tripped off that. Like, over the years, he obviously been locked up with people that's been through our program. He said, but that was the first time somebody really talked about how serious I take the work.
Right.
And like, you're not gonna just come when you want or disturb the class. Like, I'm a
Right.
real stickler
Right.
for people being accountable. But I think I'm able to hold people to that level of accountability because they know how much I love them, you know?
Right.
Yeah, so.
Right. So now, sometimes people can get mixed up, or I think they can get so focused on those who are returning or those who have committed crime that they think that's all that reentry or all that prison is about,
Mm,
when really it's impacting whole families and whole communities. And so,
absolutely.
share a little bit about like the work you do, because the work you do, I know the work you've done. It's not just for those who are coming home. It's not even just for those who are away. But a lot of what you talk about is the impact that a lot of these policies have on the families and
Sure.
how the families are impacted.
Indeed, I think my advocacy, particularly around children with incarcerated parents and families of those incarcerated, has really been motivated by my experience, by my mother's experience. I know that how I would say that incarceration or parental incarceration may be the greatest destabilizer for a child, right? And I've been saying that for a long time, but now the data is sort of caught up in saying that, we got these things called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and that if a child has an incarcerated parent, they are much more likely to be dealing with other ACEs. As in, like in my situation, having my mother dealt with mental illness, but things like having your other parent having an addiction issue, growing up in poverty, growing up in a community where you see violence, and other growing up and you experience discrimination and racism. All of those things are heightened when you have an incarcerated parent. And you're saying in America now, where you got maybe 5 million children that has had at some point an incarcerated parent. That's walking into our classrooms, that's in our communities, and in my opinion, we talking about those families and communities being destabilized, has led to other things like gun violence and things of that nature. So I just, and through my book Slug, I wanted to really show that collateral damage that my dad going to prison, look what it spawned, right? And that my life though was not unique in that way, that it was millions of American families going through this. And so what are we doing to combat that, right? Particularly, like I said, as it relates to the children with incarcerated parents in our schools. Are we preparing our teachers for that? Are we raising their awareness of what the ramifications can be when a child has an incarcerated parent, when a child goes to visit their parent? Just trying to have them have a keen sense of what the possibilities could be, and also align themselves with faith-based, community-based organizations that can provide those extra supports. So I often, like in my case, I always wonder like if my mother had somebody that she could talk to when things have went that far or as far as they went. Yeah. So that's always been sort of my motivator. So I've tried to create a culture of that where we can support these families. And when you know somebody is locked up, you have to have an extra set of like interventions ready. Now, sometimes those people be fine. It's not like saying every single family with an incarcerated loved one is going to fall apart. But the likelihood that they could is there, and we can't keep ignoring that. I think people are sort of afraid to open Pandora's box. At least that's what they feel like. But, my thing is always to them, Pandora's box is already open. It's just up to you if you decide to look at it or not. But it's open. Trust me. So, yeah.
So, from a faith perspective or a church perspective, how can faith leaders, church leaders, what are some opportunities for them to play a role or to be able to actually do some really good ministry in this space, whether it's in prison, whether it's outside with families? How do you see that? Whether it's people returning home, how do you see that?
I think on a lot of levels, I think some churches do an amazing job of doing like prison ministry and going into state and federal facilities. But again, taking the extra step though, like if you interacting with men and women in these facilities, now where are they families? I think that always has to be a part. And so how can the church support their families on the outside? How can the family support their children? And also within, I think sometimes within congregations, there may be certain shames or people feel ashamed. But I think we got to free people in the congregation to be transparent about what they're going through.
So it's not a stigma.
It's not a stigma. And so how can we as a church family support you through this ordeal? I think that's essential. On the reentry side, I think things like, whether it's programming around job readiness, mental health supports, or counseling, if you will. I think sometimes our faith leaders can probably do a better job of that even than, some practitioners. Because people be more open to have those conversations with their pastor or whatever, about what they're going through, what they went through. I think employment, right? Like even within congregation, you got people within church families that have opportunities to hire, to have opportunities to impact policies around hiring. And then like even politically, to raise the voice, amplify the voice of, what's going on. You got people within our congregation or people associated to the congregation that can't get a job, that's trying to get a job. So leaning on using our political influence to change hiring policies, to get states and federal government to create better programming to help people actually transform, and really showing how that, at the end of the day, that makes us all safer. And that's what I think we all want. We want stable, safe communities.
And so there may be some folks listening who don't have, say, your kind of testimony, or who didn't come up in this region, say, when I did, in the 80s or whatever. And for them, they may feel almost as if they don't have the kind of credibility
Yeah.
to work with folks because they haven't grown up in certain situations, haven't
Sure.
gone through certain kinds of issues,
Sure.
or maybe churches that don't even have necessarily those kinds of populations as inherently
Mm-hmm.
in them.
Mm-hmm.
To talk a little bit to that.
You know, that's a great point. And I often tell people sometimes those people can be the most effective
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, I think people become a bit tone deaf to people like me,
Mm.
right? Not even in a bad way,
Right,
but just like
right,
that's what
right,
I'm always talking about.
right,
Like, okay, we get it, right?
right.
But sometimes when people that has not been their experience, but they could talk about the reality of it is we a human family, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the what we've seen, the disparities, the racial disparities in terms of those incarcerated, we've seen people be dehumanized, communities be dehumanized, and create these perpetual cycles. If you have a soul, I feel like you should care about that,
Right.
right? So know that you can play a role. You just got to find what it is and what you do best. And I've often told people too, like, you know, even sometimes in terms of people's contributions, like I don't necessarily know if I'm saying you should have a group. Not you, I'm saying that person, right?
Right.
That you should pull up on a corner and deal with returning citizens.
Right.
But what you can do, you can support the people that do that.
Right.
You
Right.
can't say, hey, I'm gonna send $50 a month or $50 every pay period to this certain organization that works in reentry. You may be an accountant or web designer or a lawyer, and you can lend your technical support to some of these organizations that's dealing in this space. I mean, it's a big pie, and I think you just got to find out where you fit. And I think you will find out where you fit if you have that will to contribute.
Right.
And it's necessary though, because you know, again, a lot of times the people that are on the ground, if you will, the people that's really engulfed in this, there's certain doors that the person on the outside can open, maybe that person can't.
Right.
And I think we got to look for those linkages and work together to help. I mean, this is America has 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prisoners. You know what I mean? And in a country where 13% black people are 13% of the population, we about 40% of the prison population.
Wow.
These numbers are staggering.
Wow.
1 in 3 black men go to jail, 1 in 18 black women. And that's another thing, as mass incarceration has been sustained in our country, I think so much of that pressure has fell into the black woman, whether it's the girlfriend, the wife, or grandma, or aunties. And it's really impacting them, I think, in a more severe way, and it's even leading them to make the choices and decisions out of survival that's leading them to jail. So just imagine, right, what's happening to the children when mommy go to jail.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? So those are all, again, these are things that are very prevalent. And outside of just black people, when we looking at poor white folk, when we looking at our brown brothers and sisters, and particularly with immigration, you know, this administration's kind of position on immigration, when you think about children with incarcerated parents in our country, prior to people getting deported, they're detained.
Right.
And so that's incarceration. I think that's going to just drive that number up. And again, I think our public school systems all across this country, what we did in D.C. was get DCPS to actually send out a form to identify ACEs. Having an incarcerated parent was one of those things. I'm moving this year, this upcoming school, try to get that on the actual enrollment form. And I hope that we can model that all across this country. That question will be asked across the country, not to put kids in special groups, ostracize them or none of that, to be able to identify, offer their family services.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's the next step.
Now, you are a native Washingtonian. You
Yes,
ride for your city.
Yeah.
Right. Right. I mean, you ride for the city.
Yeah.
A city that has seen dramatic change.
Sure.
DC, one of the studies just said has been the hardest impacted city by gentrification
Indeed.
in the nation.
In the nation.
Right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to that. I want to come at that. Even I was talking with you before from the angle of reentry, of what it means for people to be coming home from 15, 20 year, 10 year kind of way in prison, to come home to communities that aren't even there, and families who have been displaced, because one report said that they can count 20,000 families at least that have been displaced out of D.C. as a result of gentrification.
Sure.
And how that can throw you off kilter, how that can your whole world is gone, and now you got to try to find out where your family's now living, maybe in the suburbs or somewhere else, in Prince George's County or one of these other areas. So talk about what that's like to come home and your whole neighborhood is gone.
Yeah, man. It's what's interesting is that as I've been talking about that thing for a long time, but just because I see it, right? And I used to question like, what? Why they don't understand what I'm saying? Or like that's not just my opinion. I'm literally watching this, but. And then so the Post come out with that article with the data, right? So it's from 2000 to 2013, 20,000 families, and think about what that has been the last 6 years to add it on to that. And so a person coming home to his or her community that's no longer there, their network is no longer there, their support system is no longer there. You know how many people actually releasing to homeless shelters in our city? And to me, that's a public safety issue, because if we want to impact recidivism, people need an opportunity to stabilize and then get engaged in programming. But if you don't have a home or family or no support, all the data tells us that's the most, that's like the #1 indicator to recidivism. That the person will probably reoffend when they don't have that support. And so even down to back to like sort of your initial question about the church too, I think the church has to start to think about what role does the church play. But we also in D.C., the church is been impacted equally by the same thing. If their members are leaving the city, they gonna have to leave the city. So now,
a lot of the churches are having to leave
absolutely.
the city. And the city has gotten hostile towards churches.
Sure,
so,
because now the newer resident, they don't have any allegiances to the church or to those individuals coming home. Most of the people that DC has been the most moved to place like the last 5 years in America, right? So you got a city full of strangers. There's no connectivity to the problems, because the problems in Washington are still chock this city. 95% of the people that are incarcerated, Native Washingtonians. 95% of the homeless population, Native Washingtonians. 92% of the homicide victims. We had 160 homicides last year. 150 of them were black people. You understand? So that hurt, that pain.
In a city that's no longer all black.
Yes, the city is no longer all black. So the people that are moving here, that's not them or their families that's going through the issues. For them, the city is a bustling metropolis full of, is a place where you can chase your dreams, and that's not, and that's great, right? So it's not like they should, we're not demonizing them for that. But what happens is that you can be blind to all of the suffering that coexists, but the suffering is only going on amongst us. And so that the reentry population, I feel like, is impacted the most. I mean, even down to like, we know a lot of times, even with jobs, a lot of times people can get jobs by who you know. But now the people that's hiring don't have no allegiance to you, no understanding, they don't know you. You're not their family member, right? You're not their cousin, you're not their friend. And so I think I've tried to be a bridge between the two worlds, try to raise and amplify these issues of like, hey, we got to do a better job of creating systems. DC does have, by far, like the best reentry supports in the country, but we also the only place in the country where you do all your time in the federal system, so we don't have any autonomy over interventions, training, so people aren't really being prepared to come home and be competitive in the most competitive job market in the country. So it's just so many variables in there around why we got to be very intentional and strategic in how we move around this population. And I say all that to say, though, we have had some success, right? We have had people be able to come home and reintegrate, but I think more and more that's going to be a reality in terms of people not being able to stabilize just because the city is moving so fast, right? And then, if we were a state, we had the highest incarceration rate in the country. And so it's not without a shadow of doubt for me, in my mind, the sustained mass incarceration and premature death really led to the level of gentrification that we see, though. It really has. It really played a major part in this. We can't even compare what's happening in Washington anywhere else. It's unreal. And so I don't know what that means moving forward, right? In terms of, unless we are again extremely intentional. We got a lot of thoughts about ways that we could maybe bring people back to DC jail, maybe 1 or 2 years pre-release, and really run them through some interventions that's gonna prepare them to meld into the job market and get their skill sets up. But also it's gonna take the business community to adjust hiring policy. Yeah, absolutely. And I think so if that conversation can be, if the church can help to push on that, I think that's key. I think the church still has a tremendous amount of power in being able to, You know, we gotta let people know. But 95% of people, it's ain't even about letting people out early or whatever. 95% of people in prison will return to the community. I mean, that's just a fact.
Right.
So like,
Right.
you know, so I think it doesn't, you know, we need. I was just, you know, I was saying about how I feel I got 2 children, right? And you know, public safety has never been. It's always been important to me, but it's never been as important as it is now.
Right.
And this is a public safety issue.
Right.
You know, I know so many guys who really want to do something. They don't want to break the law.
Right.
They do not.
Right.
They really want to go to work every day
Right.
and take care of their families.
Wow.
And I feel like we should afford people that opportunity.
Right.
Don't give anybody anything except the opportunity
To do right.
to do it the right way.
So, I follow you, of course, on Instagram and social media. Tell the folks your Instagram.
Yeah, at Mr. Tony Lewis Jr. So Mr. Tony Lewis Jr. That's on Instagram and Twitter, and Tony Lewis on Facebook.
Okay, so there was a post you put up a few weeks ago, I think, and you were talking about visiting your father.
Yeah.
With your daughter.
Yeah.
And you were talking about how your daughter looked around the room.
Yeah.
And said, and what was it she said about the room?
That everybody in the room looked like me and my father. And I was like, what you mean? Everybody black. It's only 2 white men in here.
Yeah.
And it was you know, in different days, you know, we've been to visit, whatever. The visiting hall ain't always like packed.
Right.
But this Saturday, the visiting hall was jam packed, and she was like on point. And I was just like, wow,
Now, how old is she again?
5.
She's 5.
She's 5. And what made her make that analysis, I don't know. It's not even like we were talking about that. Right. I wasn't talking to her. She kept looking away. We kept saying, Isabella, what's wrong? Like, what you looking at? And she was like, nothing. And then she was looking around, and she was like, and then she made that statement. I was like, oh my God.
Talked about everybody in here.
Yeah. Like, everybody here black.
Like us.
Every man, they got one of these brown khaki uniforms on, black. They look like it. Like, well, it was only 2 white men in here. And see, the thing about it, her school was real diverse, right? Mm-hmm. And to her, right, that was like not fair, not out of the lens that we say is not fair, but just she like, it ain't no balance in this room.
Right.
But she was right.
Because I'm used to balance.
Yeah, I'm used to balance. It's all kind of people. Absolutely. Absolutely.
All kinds of friends.
It's a fact. And all kinds of, like, you know, my wife biracial, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So even within that, like my father-in-law from Portugal, and my mother-in-law Afro-Brazilian. So even in our house, we got diversity, right? You know what I'm saying? Speaking different languages and all that even in my house. But so that's very much a part of their reality.
Right.
And I think inadvertently, that's what she looks for. That's what's, you know what I mean? That's her reality, right? So she made that assessment. We were like, Flo, I don't even know what do you say back to? I was like, yeah.
Right, to a 5-year-old.
To a 5-year-old. Like, wow. And my dad, like he was like, Slug, I cannot believe she said that. Like, I mean, but it was so on point. And that's in many prisons across this country. I mean, that's what's happening. It's us. And, you know, even down to like when you see white guys, they're typically older.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And my experience, you don't see a lot of young white dudes in jail. Wow. Now, maybe, obviously, we were in like maybe Kentucky or something like that. Right. You know what I mean? California, maybe, you know what I'm saying? Because but in the federal system, though, you know what I'm saying? Because there's people, it's the feds, people from all over the country. Yeah, you don't see young white guys. You don't. And, you know, one of the things, too, that on that same visiting day, that sparked something in my thought pattern. I do the toy giveaway for children with incarcerated parents. And my methodology working with my dad is for him to identify guys at his jail, and we connect their children with the gifts. I give bikes and tennis shoes. City always support it, right? We give them a bike and a pair of tennis shoes. So the last time we did it, it was very interesting. We had like, I think 75 bikes and 75 pairs of sneakers. I think we had like 10 or 15 left over. And what it represented is that a lot of these guys aren't as connected to their families or to their children as like they were when I was coming up. And so when in a visiting hall the other day, I just noticed how many grandmothers, when you see children, you would see the mother in the visiting hall. Right. Not so much anymore. Wow. So I don't even know what that's speaking to, but I know that it's speaking to something. It's something. Right. People aren't as connected. And my thought is that, again, what I had, even though my dad doing life in prison, he was around. He wasn't physically around,
Right.
but he was a constant in my life to some degree, whether it was with information, you know what I'm saying, or whatever it was, encouragement or whatever. That was a part of my development,
Right.
even from prison. In the first 13 years, he was all the way in California.
Wow.
But I'm thinking about these babies that are in the community today, not even having their dad or their mommy even from jail, and all of that extra burden falling on our seniors.
Right. Right. Right.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So those are the kind of things that again, speaks to the need for us to do the best job we can to identify these families and to in turn support them because they need our support.
Right.
Yeah, no question.
Now, right before I let you go, I want to pivot just a little bit.
Sure.
Because I know all the work you do in reentry, but I also know you're just a stand-up kind of community guy.
Yeah.
And there's a large level of grief in the community right now as a result of the passing of Brother Nipsey Hussle.
Yeah.
Strong rap, and for those who don't know, Nipsey Hussle's a rap artist, but much more than a rap artist because he was just a major philanthropist. He was very much about rebuilding community and had bought stuff in community, giving people jobs and all that.
Sure.
He also spoke very highly in a relationship with his sister-in-law in London, and just was very aggressive in the way he spoke about a healthy relationship, treating the children right, just all of that kind of stuff. He was really a brother who was really focused on personal growth and development and trying to grow and be better. And
no doubt about it.
He was recently shot and killed tragically out in front of one of the various strip malls that he had purchased for the community.
Yeah.
In front of his own stuff. And so, you're just watching this great level of grief. Folks are grieving in some ways, and I would say even maybe in a large way, than when, say, Tupac and Biggie died in our generation. That it
For
hit
sure.
us, when
sure.
Tupac and Biggie passed. What are some of your thoughts about just his passing, about the tragedy of it, about how we need to wrap our arms around community in this moment, especially our young people?
Yeah, it hit me hard, man. I had the opportunity to meet Nipsey last year, almost to the date. It was in April last year at the Broccoli City Festival. He performed, and so a friend of mine from Philadelphia named Wallow was in town for the festival as well. And him and Nipsey had a relationship, so he introduced us, and I was in his trailer for like an hour prior to his performance, and he asked me and Wallow to come on stage with him for his performance, and just a solid brother, a real king. That was about development of his community. He grew up in gang culture in LA. He bought property in his community, empowered his community. And outside of that, I mean, just things like cryptocurrency and STEM and, just talking about moving the needle for us as black people. A powerful brother. And so his passing, him standing for all of that and for him to get killed in front of his store, in a strip mall that he owns by a friend, right? By somebody that he knows, right? And I think for me, it frightens me. It's a microcosm of like what we really are up against as it relates to this immense self-hatred. And that it's not all of our fault, right? I believe that our existence in this country has led to that. From slavery to Jim Crow and just systematic racism and oppression, and that we always on this kind of crab in the barrel thing. But I'm hopeful that Nip will not die in vain. That this will be a trigger for us to wake up and not in sort of that superficial, we got to be woke way, and that we got to love each other. We got to do better. We got to put down the guns. We got to support each other way. And that's one of the things he, in his last album, which was actually, in my opinion, the best album. It was nominated for a Grammy. It didn't win, but the best album in 2018. And he speak about that throughout the album, like, let's get on one accord. Let's build our community. Let's show more love. All of these things. And you mentioned about him with his family. And it's something when you become enlightened, right? And you glow and you start to know what matters. And I know what it's like to come from a community where you just in survival mode and you seeing all this trauma and death, But when you're able to get through that,
Right.
and you know, as me, somebody, I still live in my same house I grew
Right.
up in.
Right.
So him not leaving his community, and
Right.
I'm big on that, not leaving your community.
Right.
But then something like this happens
Right.
in your community.
Right.
But I think we have to remain vigilant and knowing that Nipsey wasn't wrong.
Right. 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 Right.
He wasn't wrong, right?
Right.
That person committed an evil act, but he wasn't wrong in trying to empower his community and not leaving his community. I think we have to follow his lead on that. And
Because he had enough that he could have gone anywhere.
oh, without question. And at this point, you know, we talking about reentry, right? What has come out to recently is that he didn't have his security because he just left. He got a call that one of his friends came home from doing 20 years, and he was supposed to be meeting him at the store to give him clothes for when he came home. So he just ran to the store real quick without his team, and that's how it kind of. He was helping his man, trying to help his man who had just touched down after doing 20 years, like that kind of. And I think that speaks to just who he was as a person.
Right.
Yeah, and in a place though where he probably felt as safe.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right. Right.
As safe, and I think that's the thing that weighs on me heavily, man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think we all gotta, you included, like we all just have to be, have a heightened awareness, and that hurt people.
Right.
And that's why it's important to get as much love out here in the spaces as we can.
Right.
Because you know, you just people on that ledge every day, and I think that's why I take my work so seriously, because I know that I see that every day, that people are really an argument away from throwing their hands up.
Right. Right. Right.
You know, because this trauma is so constant in the lives of black men and women. You know, and you know, we gotta work on that. We got to work on that. And I tell people all the time, that's why, you know, wherever you're in your car and somebody cut you off, all that road rage, all those petty arguments, all that stuff, just be like, leave that alone. It's not. And you ain't got to address everything. Sometimes you just let people keep moving because you don't know what that person going through. Yeah, so, yeah, God rest Nip's soul and God bless his family, you know, Lorna London, their children, his brothers and parents, and, you know, his dad was a Eritrean. So he spoke a lot about having, you know, just being in tune even with, you know, his family in Africa and all that. Like, the brother was a deep brother, man. And I got a chance to meet him, so that changed it too. But like, I don't think any celebrity death, and I was probably the biggest Biggie fan in the world, but I don't know if any celebrity death impacted me like this one. Because I felt, you know what I'm saying, he, us.
And I think the thing about this, when Pac died, when Biggie died, talked a lot about their music. Talked about their life some.
Right.
But it was majority music and then some of their life.
Yeah.
With him,
Yeah, man.
most of what people are talking about is his life.
Somebody said, I saw something on Twitter where they said that, like, basically Pac talked about a lot of things he wanted to do. Nipsey did those things. I think that's a, you know, yeah. He actually was doing it. He was actually living in that. You know?
And so that's amazing to me. Most of the articles you're seeing, etc., about him are like 10% about his music, 90% about his work, about his life. And I think that is what has been very touching for me, to see a brother, like you said, who's come out of gang culture, come out of a certain way of lifestyle, who was able to grow in his music, in his life, and grow in front of the world. In such a way. It's just a tragedy that we're not able to see kind of that growth play out till his old age. But where he would be.
And as far as mainstream, come on. He was, you know, because his whole thing was like independence, right? And this album was his first like major album, and his trajectory had just went through the roof. He was just in GQ, like a struggle. You know what I'm saying? All that. Like talking about things being vertically integrated, where you got a piece of every part of the play, like this type of stuff. When I remember when I went out to last year, when I went out to Facebook for the meeting with the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, I was playing Nipsey Hussle. I got a little clip. I was playing Nipsey Hussle. I'm going for the biggest meeting of my life. I was playing Nipsey record on my way in Palo Alto. You know, it's no question. It's because that victory lap. He talking about all the things that we dream about, and owning your own stuff, and again being vertically integrated, and not allowing people to abuse you or take what you create, you know. And then so like I think he was a symbol of entrepreneurship, of all the community philanthropy, all in a very real way. And I just hope that again his legacy will be that young men and women all across this country follow his example.
Right.
Yeah. So again, God rest his soul.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing, as we're talking, for me is in this moment, I really want us to celebrate the victory of his life and not the tragedy of his death.
Indeed.
Right.
Indeed.
And I think if we can learn those lessons and really stay focused on that, then it can help us to help steer young brothers and sisters in the right direction.
Indeed. Yes, sir.
Yeah, rest in peace, brother.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Tony, man, I appreciate you, man.
Oh, you man, appreciate you, bro.
You are my guy.
My man, you already know.
Yeah, I mean, you
So,
know, for real.
no question about it.
So we appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on Hope Labs.
Thanks for having me, man. It's cool.
Yeah,
as always.
It's been pretty dope. and this won't be your last time, bro.
Indeed.
We got all kinds of stuff to keep
For sure,
talking.
sure. Yes, sir.
Oh, tell people where to get your book.
Oh, yeah. Slug, A Boy's Life in the Age of Mass Incarceration, Amazon, iTunes. Yeah. TonyLewisJr.com.
Y'all get it. It's
Yeah.
the man, Tony Lewis Jr. I'm telling y'all, you in D.C., he's a king.
I appreciate
My
that.
man.
My man. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you,
Yes,
man.
sir.
Bless you.